This coconut cake is as much about texture as it is about flavor, and that's what dessert should be. It should be both. Hi everyone, I'm Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. We're making a layer cake. I haven't made a layer cake in so long. It's coconut cake and it's buttery and delicious, and I'm gonna show you a really cool type of frosting called a German buttercream. Almost like a whipped cream texture. It's really special and the cake is spectacular and beautiful. This recipe is sort of a modification of the coconut layer cake in Dessert Person, which has like a separate filling and uses a lot of fresh coconut. So this is like a little bit more streamlined. This time I'm just gonna do one frosting, this kind of German buttercream that I'm gonna put in between the layers and also to cover the cake. The version in Dessert Person was based on a recipe that I made like so many years ago, like forever ago. That was a Paul Prudhomme recipe from his long gone restaurant called K. Paul's. And it starts by cracking open like 6 whole coconuts. So we don't have to do that here. This one, we're gonna use some dried coconut, some coconut milk, some coconut oil, and get tons of coconut flavor. I'm not using extract. I don't love the very kind of like artificial coconut flavor that you get from extract that makes you feel like you're eating suntan lotion. We're going for natural coconut flavor here, but also like a very buttery rich cake. So I'm very excited to show you. For the cake layers, I have over here some cake flour, a couple sticks of butter, granulated sugar, 4 large eggs, kosher salt, baking powder. This is virgin coconut oil. So virgin is the unrefined, which has the coconut aroma and flavor in it. I'm using coconut milk. This is gonna go into the batter, and also some of it gets reserved for soaking the layers to prevent them from drying out. For the frosting and assembly, so I have 4 egg yolks, a cup of milk, 3 sticks of butter, 2 tablespoons of the virgin coconut oil. That's gonna also help to perfume the frosting and give it coconut flavor. Cornstarch, half of a vanilla bean, more granulated sugar, and unsweetened coconut flakes, which I toast and they coat the outside of the cake, and the whole thing is like so fluffy and fun looking. So you can see that there's like a lot of cross-utilization of ingredients between the frosting and the cake layers. In terms of special equipment, it's definitely much easier to make this recipe with a stand mixer as opposed to a hand mixer, so I'm gonna use that. I have the paddle, and I'll also grab the whisk for the frosting. I'm gonna need a small saucepan because the custard component of the frosting is cooked. And importantly, I have 3 8-inch aluminum cake pans, and I pre-cut little rounds of parchment paper, so I have that. Before I get into the recipe, I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. Today I'm making coconut cake. We have butter in the cake, we have butter in the frosting. Kerrygold butter makes the richest, silkiest, creamiest buttercream frosting, but it's also my butter of choice just for all my baking and eating at home. I love it because it's so spreadable. It has that pure butter flavor. It's really kind of my all-purpose butter, and for my money, it's the best butter you can buy in the supermarket. All their products are made from milk from cows that graze on grass on family-owned farms in Ireland. I use it for cooking eggs, just on toast, and my chocolate chip cookies. I love browning it for recipes because there's just so many milk solids and it gets so toasty and so flavorful. So I hope you check it out. If you go to the link below, you can learn more, the link in the description. And now back to the recipe. I have all my ingredients at room temp, which is very important. I'm gonna get my oven on 350. So you want all of your ingredients at room temperature because this is a butter-based cake. And the butter is room temp, and that is gonna allow me to cream together the butter and sugar to work some air into the mixture so that I have fluffy, light cake. And if your eggs or like your, coconut milk or, dairy component is cold, it causes the butter to harden and then you lose that texture. So I have my coconut oil, which is 3 tablespoons, that's gonna go into the batter, but I have just the jar here. I'm gonna use this to grease my pans. It's very room temp in our kitchen, and the coconut oil is halfway solidified, soft enough that I can brush it with a brush. If you're in a cold kitchen and the coconut oil is very solid, you will need to warm it up slightly. So it's like a little bit liquefied. So I'm just gonna take a super thin coating and brush it around the bottom and sides. And then the round of parchment goes in, and then I just make sure to smooth it out very well to eliminate any air bubbles. I'm gonna do that with my remaining 2. Hold on to that pastry brush because we will use it to soak the layers after they're cooled. So those are my pans. Now I want to get my coconut milk. Make sure it's very, very well shaken. You want it to be pretty homogeneous. And this is unsweetened coconut milk. So all of my coconut components are unsweetened, and that's because there's plenty of sugar in this cake from just sugar. So I don't really want to add any sugar where I don't need to. And it's full fat coconut milk, not light. I mean, light would work, but I don't know. It's like I just use the thing, you know? So I need to measure out 1 cup from this can. And then I'm going to reserve the remaining coconut milk in here for soaking the layers. And we'll bring this in when we're assembling. I'm going to just mix my dry ingredients so they're ready to go. I'm using cake flour. Cake flour makes such a difference when you're making a layer cake or any kind of cake. So it's lower protein than all purpose, and so it produces less gluten. You just have something that's lighter and more tender. So I'm going to add to my cake flour some kosher salt and baking powder, and I'm just going to mix all that together. You don't need to sift. If you have very lumpy flour, just whisk it well. Let me just crack my eggs and get these ready to go. So 4 large eggs. Also room temp, that's really important. Okay, so I'm gonna get my butter in here. This is 2 sticks of butter, room temp. In addition to the butter, which is really the kind of base of the cake, it is a butter cake, I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of that virgin coconut oil. It's going to add just that kind of like perfume of coconut that I want. I'm gonna add my sugar. And now we're gonna start beating this together. The creaming step with butter and sugar takes a while. It's a good, like, solid 5 minutes or so. We want it to be super, super light and fluffy and almost white in color. I'm on kind of medium, call it medium high. So this mixture is very light and fluffy. I am going to add my eggs now, one at a time, and just beat these in. I want them to emulsify into the batter. And because they're the same temperature, they mix in really smoothly and easily. I am forgetting something, and I'm so glad I remembered. Do you know what it is? I forgot the vanilla. Almost forgot. We're gonna say that's a couple of teaspoons. So I have my dry ingredients that are already mixed. I have my coconut milk, vanilla. We're gonna start with our dry ingredients and alternate with the coconut milk. But you always begin and end with dry. So it's 3 additions of dry and 2 of the coconut milk. And so I'm just going to start by mixing on low speed and adding roughly 1/3 of this mixture. Then I'm going to stream in about half of the liquid ingredients. And by starting and ending with dry, it helps to maintain that careful emulsion that we built with the eggs and butter. You don't want to overwhelm with liquid, really, because it will break that emulsion. Then I'm going to add half of the remaining dry ingredients, or about 1/3 of the total. The rest of the wet goes in. And then the remaining dry. And as with any cake, you don't want to overmix. So as soon as you see that last bit of dry flour disappear, stop the mixer. I'm going to take the paddle off. And I do always fold by hand after I take it out of the mixer, and it just helps to make sure everything is really uniform. It's common with a butter-based cake to have like more of the butter trapped on the bottom and around the sides. And we just want to make sure everything's well mixed. So I'm going to scrape down my paddle. I'm going to fold this by hand, and I really want to make sure I'm scraping down along the sides and underneath. Fortunately, with cake flour and also just mixing by hand, you're not going to overmix. So we have our batter. I'm going to grab my prepared cake pans, and I'm going to use a scale. With a thick batter like this that doesn't settle into a flat layer in the pan, it's a lot harder to guess if you're dividing evenly. So my 3 pans are filled with equal weights of batter. I'm just going to use my little offset spatula to work each pan into an even layer. I I have my cake layers. They're ready to go in the oven. I have a rack on the upper third and lower third. I'm gonna go one cake in the middle on one rack, and then staggering the second two pans on either side on the second rack. And that's just to avoid blocking the heat from any of the cakes. And then halfway through baking, at like the 15-minute mark, I'll probably rotate racks and like side to side. So 350, and the total bake time, it's like 25 minutes. They bake pretty fast. They're not that thick. This is the layer that started on the top. It got a little bit done because of the heat of the oven. So I pulled this one out first. The second two layers are about finished baking, so I'm gonna pull those out. This one went closer to 25, and the second two it's like been more like 30. So I'm gonna pull them out. It's pretty easy to determine doneness. You can see that this one's darker and it's domed less, and that's because the heat from the top of the oven, I probably should have rotated them earlier. It like sets the top so it doesn't rise quite as much. So I am gonna do some leveling of the layers before we assemble. And that's for two reasons. One is it's going to give me really flat layers, which is gonna be easier to assemble. The second reason is because it exposes some of the crumb and gives me like, it creates the ability for the cake to really absorb the coconut milk, which soak that I'm gonna put on it. So I'm gonna let these cool and set them aside. While my oven is still hot, I'm going to toast my coconut for the outer coating. So here I have this kind of large flake unsweetened coconut, and I wanna toast it. I love the way that coconut flakes toast. It's like they kind of toast from one side. So you get this cool like ombre gradient, a little bit of like, you know, beautiful golden brown into white. And this will toast very quickly. So it's not the kind of thing you want to walk away from. You want to just check on it after a few minutes and make sure that it's not getting too dark. So they naturally started to pull away from the sides of the pan as they baked. But I'm gonna run my little offset spatula, you could use like a butter knife, around the sides just to make sure there's no sticking. And I'm gonna grab another rack so I have a little more room. So I'm gonna unmold these two cakes, and it's just a simple flip onto the rack. Remove the pans, careful they're hot. All right, these are nice and beautiful golden brown on the bottoms. These look great. You can tell the cake is like so tender and bouncy. And now that third layer onto here. So these are gonna fully cool. I'm gonna set them aside. I did forget about the coconut. I told you not to. And I pulled it out after it was probably like 5 minutes. The top layer of coconut got like pretty browned, but then when I mix it up, it kind of mixes with the paler pieces on the bottom, and actually it's very, very nice. So yes, there's some darker pieces, but this looks great, and I think that color contrast is gonna look really pretty on the final cake. So this is done. This is gonna cool. My oven, I turned it off. We're done with that for now. And now I can concentrate on the frosting and then assembly. The first step of making German buttercream is to make this kind of cooked custard / pudding mixture. I'm gonna add, this is just 1 cup of milk. We're making a relatively small quantity of custard because I'm just making enough of the German buttercream to frost 1 3-layer 8-inch cake. You could make more and freeze it. Like a lot of other styles of buttercream, it freezes very well. So let me scrape this vanilla pod. These are all my vanilla seeds. Those are gonna go in to the milk, and then the pod also. So I'm gonna get this heating on medium-low. And now while that's coming up to temp, this is 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar. I'm gonna divide it. I'm going to add about half of it to my milk mixture, so it's gonna dissolve. Then I'm gonna add the other half with my starch. So I have cornstarch here. This is 30 grams of cornstarch. And this makes a very, very thick pudding. It's not like the consistency that you would want for just pudding that you're gonna eat. It has a lot of starch because that is going to create the structure for the buttercream. So now I'm gonna whisk together the cornstarch and sugar. I have 4 egg yolks. So I'm going to combine my egg yolks with my sugar and starch mixture. So once you combine your egg yolks with that sugar starch mixture, you don't wanna let them sit. I am just vigorously whisking. I wanna lighten this. This step is called where you're just really mixing it until your egg yolks are light in color and also in texture. Like there's a little bit of air worked into them. Sometimes it's easier to do this like this. I have some steam coming off of my milk. So now I'm at a simmer, and now I'm gonna combine them. I'm gonna take my warm milk mixture and I'm going to slowly add it to my yolks while whisking constantly. This is going to gently and slowly raise the temperature of my yolks. If I were to just pour the yolks into my hot milk, I risk cooking them and curdling them. So about 2/3 of the milk goes in. And now I whisk my yolk mixture back into the saucepan. Make sure I get all of it in. Okay, the idea here is to bring this mixture to a boil. And the important thing is to hold it at a boil while whisking constantly for, I usually go like 30 seconds or so. And that is to ensure that the starches are fully activated. So that cornstarch has like is achieving its full thickening power, and the eggs will be cooked also. And the reason you don't want to stop whisking is because you don't want the custard to be in contact with the hot pan and not moving, because it will then overcook and the eggs will, make it just not smooth. Okay, so I can tell that this is starting to thicken. Okay, so this is very, very thick. I'm gonna turn it off. And now I need to cool this down. So what you could do is, if you were doing this a little bit ahead of time, which is great, you can scrape it onto into a shallow bowl, or even like onto a sheet tray, and cover it with plastic. The covering is important because a skin can easily form on the surface if it's exposed to the air. So you cover it directly with plastic and then cool it down in the fridge. Actually, I'm going to add my coconut oil now, but I'm going to just stir this in an ice bath. I want it to be cooled down rapidly so I can go right into assembling the buttercream. This is for flavor, of course, but it also makes this mixture a little bit more malleable, like a little bit more supple. This is that base for the buttercream. And now I'm going to cool it down. I have some ice right here, and I'm going to just actually use this same bowl. And what I'm going to do is just stir the mixture, making sure to scrape the bottom and sides really well as I go, until it's cooled but not cold. We want it to be pretty room temp. So I'm going to set this aside. I'm done with the ice bath. I'm just going to leave it in here because we actually end up adding this to the butter. What I am going to do is pluck out that vanilla pod. This I like to wash and save for my homemade vanilla extract. So I have my 3 sticks of butter, that's 12 ounces. I have found with buttercream that if I start out with the whisk, depending on the recipe that I'm making, there can be a tendency to sort of over whip it and actually sort of work in too much air. I've started to basically begin with the paddle and then switch to the whisk to then whip as much air as I want into the mixture. So I'm going to start with this on kind of medium speed. I'm going to turn my mixer up to kind of medium high, and I'm going to slowly add my pudding mixture, a tablespoon or 2 at a time. It's very, very thick, but it will smooth out into the buttercream. And I just felt it's nicely room temp. And once I see the first addition incorporate into the butter, I can add more. My last little bit of the custard's gonna go in. So everything has been added. Everything is really well combined. I'm gonna give it a little scrape down. And now I'm gonna switch to my whisk so I can beat it and incorporate some air and get that really fluffy, light, almost whipped cream-like texture that I am going for. So there is some like trapped butter around the bottom and side. So I'm just scraping and folding to make sure that once I pop the whisk on, it incorporates everything. Do you know what this really needs?
Salt.
It really needs salt. I'm gonna grab a big pinch of salt, and I'm gonna add it, and I'm just gonna get this whipping. While this is whipping, I'm gonna get ready to start assembling the layers. I'm using a cake stand. You could use any kind of serving plate or cake plate. I'm gonna take my layer and I'm gonna flip it over. It's so bouncy. I know it's gonna be a wonderful texture. So see, I lost a little bit of the surface from the rack, but that's okay because we're gonna actually take off this layer and see that crumb underneath that like smooth top layer of cake. That's what I wanna expose because I want all those little air pockets and bubbles in the cake to like pull that soak down into the layer. I'm using a serrated knife. It's not super domed, so I'm not having to take off a lot. Really what you want to do is just hold the knife perfectly parallel to your work surface and do little sort of sawing motion back and forth, keeping an eye on where the knife is kind of entering and leaving the cake layer and adjusting the angle if needed. And one of the things I like best about leveling cake is that you get to then taste it. With a lot of kinds of desserts, like you don't have an opportunity to try it as you're putting it together, but now you can try the cake. It's so tender, not too sweet, so good. Vaguely coconutty. So I'm gonna assemble directly on my cake stand. If you needed this cake to be very mobile, you can assemble it on a cardboard cake round. And then you can easily like transfer it between like the fridge and a serving plate and all that. But I'm just gonna go directly on here. So I'm gonna take my first layer, get it on my cake plate and center it. And now I'm gonna take my coconut milk, my pastry brush, and just give it a soak. Because I've exposed the crumb, it really is like a sponge. It will pull that soak into the layers, but you don't want to really brush because that's going to stir up the crumbs on the surface, so it's a dabbing motion. So I really just do one single round of dabbing until I've covered the whole surface. It doesn't really need more than that. It's really up to you how much frosting you want to add between the layers. I usually think for an 8-inch cake, about a cup is pretty generous. Now with my small offset spatula, work it into an even layer all the way to the edges and even a little bit beyond. It's gonna make covering the assembled cake that much easier. So now I'm going to repeat that leveling process with the second layer, soak, frosting, and then I'll show you how to put the third layer on. I am going to remove the top just like I did for the first two. And this is that layer that started out on the top rack and got like a little bit browned early on. So it did sort of stunt the rise. It might be a little bit thinner than the other two layers, and that's partly why I'm keeping it for the top layer, because the bottom two layers will compress a little bit under the weight. It's still nicely baked though. So we're gonna soak this just as we did for the first two. And now the trick to putting on your top layer to help make the frosting process easier is to put it on upside down. So that means that the bottom of the layer, which is like smooth and sealed, is going to become the top of the cake and it's going to be perfectly flat. Now this is the only part that I think is a little bit tricky. The layers are just delicate, so you want to be gentle and careful when you're basically flipping it over and putting it on top of the cake. Once you place it, you can like slide it around a little bit, so it's not like you have to do it all in one fell swoop. But basically, we're just going to kind of gently place it on. And then I always like to get eye level with it. And you can see that the top layer is a little bit shorter than the other two. Make sure that it's lined up with the other two layers in terms of the sides. Okay, this I'm done with. I'll save these for little snacks. And now we're ready to coat the entire cake. So you can see now, because that top layer is upside down, there's this like very smooth, non-crummy surface. For a cake where the outer coating is just buttercream or some kind of frosting, I do recommend a crumb coat, which is a very, very thin layer of frosting applied to all the exposed surfaces. And it acts to like slick any loose crumbs to the side of the cake so that when you then put on your final layer of frosting, you don't have any little crumbs in the surface. I don't really need to do that here because we're gonna actually coat the cake in coconut, so it's not gonna matter if you see any crumbs. So with frosting a cake, I always like to start with more frosting than I think I'll need, and then you can take it away. I just think it's easier to do it that way than to apply more, like especially around the sides. You can see when I put the frosting on that the whole thing like wobbles a little bit because the layers are just so light and delicate. I mean, I still have some frosting left. This is more than I'm gonna need, so I can always remove some as I go. But basically you work it across the top in a pretty even layer and evenly around, and then the frosting sort of cascades down the sides. If you're assembling on the plate that you're serving on, you wanna just protect it and make sure it stays really neat. You can put little strips of parchment paper all the way around the cake, and then you remove them once you're done frosting. I've just about worked the frosting all the way down and around the sides. I'm just doing some extra strokes to make sure that it goes all the way down to the bottom and I have no areas of cake that are exposed. I mean, I did remove a little bit of frosting. Overall, I don't have such a thick layer. Sometimes it can be hard to judge the thickness with this method. And so sometimes I'll use like a little cake tester or toothpick and just like press it down to see like how thick is that top layer. I would say it's about 1/4 inch. So if you feel like you have a lot of excess, just scrape it back into the bowl. I might just do a little bit of rounding of those top edges. And now I'm ready to apply my coconut. It doesn't really matter how it looks at this point. You just want there to be the right amount of frosting and for it to be evenly applied. And that's it. So here I have my toasted coconut and I left it on the sheet tray because this is gonna make it easier to coat the cake. So I start by applying it to the top. So now I'm taking handfuls and I am starting at the base of the cake and kind of opening up my hand and working my hand inward to apply the coconut up the sides of the cake. And then I'm working on the sheet tray because I can kind of like tilt the pan and remove the excess to keep working my way around. So this technique for coating any cake, whether you're doing it with coconut or sprinkles or like chocolate curls, this is a nice method because it helps to kind of contain the mess. Okay, so I've worked all the way around. So anywhere I see a bare spot, I can just apply a little bit more coconut. I'm going to remove excess from actually the top as well because the top, like you could just pile it on. I don't want there to be so much loose coconut, so I'm gonna kind of work some of that off the surface. This is the loose coconut, when you go to cut it, will just fall off. So I'm gonna remove all the excess from around the edges. I do have some leftover shredded coconut, save that. You can put it on ice cream or like on yogurt. The cake is done. So now I'm just gonna kind of clean up. I'll save the leftover coconut, the leftover frosting, and then we're ready to cut and taste. I don't think I've had this coconut cake in years. It's been a very long time. So I'm very, very excited to eat it. I love coconut cake and I feel like I should have more of it in my life. So now this cake is perfectly room temp. If you're making it ahead of time, you can stick it in the fridge. I would loosely cover it with plastic wrap. It does benefit from having like a brief chill before cutting it because it will help you to get cleaner slices, but you don't want to serve it cold. You do want it to be room temp because you need that buttercream to like have that soft, supple, smooth texture. And if you serve it cold, then it just firms up and you don't get that. Ooh. Looks pretty good. Don't fall over, don't fall over. Wow, the layers are so fluffy. The frosting is so light. Also, we talk about the coconut on the outside. Yes, it's for flavor, but it's also that little crunch. My favorite thing is when you have cake that's like so light and tender that you can pick it up on the back of your fork by like pressing down. This cake, oh my God. It's very rare to have a cake this buttery that's so light at the same time. And that's why I love the recipe. I just can't imagine a more perfect coconut cake. I really hope you try this. If you're not a coconut lover, ask yourself if it's because you don't like that coconut extract flavor, and if you might actually like this version because it has like natural coconut flavor from using 3 different kinds of coconut plus all the butter. It's that perfect balance of flavor and texture and everything. So I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. I couldn't do basically most of the baking in my kitchen if it weren't for Kerrygold and their awesome products that they make. So I want to thank them. If you want to learn more about Kerrygold and their products, you can check out the link in the description below. And I hope you make this. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.